Cameron, a principal engineer at Netskope, a new company that just came out of stealth in October last year. We are going to be talking to Rob about managing IT operations for a cloud-based solution such as Netskope, to get his thoughts, his vision, his requirements around what it takes to successfully manage operations for a cloud-based, SaaS-based offering such as Netskope. This is going to be a conversation with Rob Cameron, and it's going to be more of an interview, question and answer type session. Let me start with quickly giving you an introduction of Netskope, the company we're going to be talking about today, and Rob, and then I'm going to start with getting Rob's thoughts on a few key questions that we have here to get going. Netskope, as some of you, for those of you that know about the company, came out of stealth in the October of last year. Netskope is a cloud application analytics and policy company. Netskope eliminates the catch-22 situation between companies having the need to be agile and secure and compliant by providing visibility and enforcing sophisticated policies around the usage of cloud applications. Netskope performs deep analytics and enables decision makers to create policies in just a few clicks to protect corporate data and optimize cloud application usage in real time and at scale. With Netskope, customers and users within enterprises can get their favorite cloud applications and enable businesses to move forward fast with confidence. Netskope is a cloud-based solution, and the company has implemented modern IT operations using a DevOps framework to support the needs of their business. And today we're going to be getting Rob's perspective on what it takes to deliver IT operations behind such an environment. Let me quickly give you an introduction of Rob's background. Rob has more than a decade of experience in IT management. He has authored or co-authored 6 books on information technology. One of his recent books is IT Security Interviews Exposed: Secrets to Landing Your Next Information Security Job, which I'm sure would be of interest to many of you in this webinar. Prior to Netskope, Rob held a series of roles at Juniper Networks. We sincerely thank Rob for agreeing to join our webinar here and share his thoughts, which I'm sure would be valuable to all of you. And we're going to get Rob's take on what it takes and how he sees modern IT operations management in a DevOps type paradigm, what it takes to deliver such IT operations functions for a cloud-based solution such as Netskope's. Let me get Rob's take on a few key questions at the outset here. So Rob, as we start looking at your challenges, can you give us a top-level perspective on the nature of the challenges in doing IT operations for an on-demand cloud-based solution such as Netskope? Particularly, if you can speak from an IT security and compliance standpoint, that would help us get grounded here.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks for having me today. I appreciate everyone attending. So the challenge, I think, with having with today's products in general, and Netskope being a product, is that you need to create a product that can constantly evolve to work with the customer and to meet the customer's needs. And in the past, we used to live in a world, and in some cases still do, a waterfall development model, meaning that it's going to take you 18 to 24 months to come up with a product. And I think that's really great, except the fact that you're guessing what a customer wants in 18 to 24 months. And in things like the security field, 18 to 24 months is an infinite amount of time, it seems. Today's exploits will be very different by tomorrow, and we need to be able to adapt quicker to that. So in a lot of products, whether it be an IT service, whether it be a video game, are really being focused around being cloud-based. And to me, what cloud-based means, and this comes from a friend of mine, Chris Hoff, Beaker on Twitter, I'm sure you're familiar, he's a very popular guy in the community, it's that cloud is more of an operational strategy about how to run a service. And so it's not so much about this, oh, it's in a data center. Well, we've had data centers for 50 years. It's about having a way to run that data center in a way that's easy to expand and grow upon. And I think one of the challenges around that is we can expand things, we can add systems, we can scale very easily today with all the technologies. But how do you ensure when you're doing that and providing a security service, or really any service today needs to have security in mind, again, especially with all these recent breaches we've seen over the holidays, how do you do it? How do you maintain that? And I think a lot of it comes down to, the things that Netskope does is providing analytics for customers. It's providing analytics for your own environment. And I like to call that sharpening the razor. So we can take something, and a razor can be very sharp, but I think it can always be sharper. We can get that, microscope out, that electron microscope, and really see it. So with things like security compliance, you need to be able to have tools that can identify if there are issues around security or policy issues. So with security is really a policy that we apply, and a policy as far as a construct organizationally. So when you need to apply that, and you have, in our case, we're a SOC 1, SOC 2 compliant, we need to apply those policies that we've created in a fashion that meets the IT organization. So we use a lot of different tools to be able to achieve and monitor that.
Sure. So I totally get the enforcing policy and delivering an operational setup that can enforce those policies. Let me ask you, how do you prove that and demonstrate to your auditors, internal and external, that you follow these policies?
Absolutely. That's the key fact for passing an audit. So we have to have extensive documentation around everything that we do. And so one of the great tools that we have by using Vistara, and this is actually the core reason I was attracted to it, is the ability when a server is accessed or a host is accessed to identify who's accessed it, and not only that, but what they've done. Because it's the auditability or the auditing capability for that really is important to us.
And so can you give us some examples of the types of information that you'd want to provide for the audit?
Absolutely.
Right.
So things that are very important, especially around SOC compliance, are things for privacy and confidentiality, privacy being user side, confidentiality being corporate side. The things that are important there is who has access to systems, and more importantly, who has access to the confidential data for the customer. And then for the people who have access to it, what have they done with it when they have access? And I think a lot of clouds, and we've seen in a lot of breaches for clouds, are managed from I have a backdoor access or a bastion host to get into the system. And the thing is as easy it is for you to get into the cloud is as easy as it for anybody to get into the cloud. And so with that, having access to the cloud identified, audited, and then the specific access needed is very important. So it's not just access to the entire cloud, but to the specific host to do exactly what you need, and then going back and being able to show what exactly happened during that period of time. That helps us to be successful with our auditors.
Going back to sort of the earlier point you had made, around cloud as being a way to set up a particular operational paradigm. Can you share some of your principles and beliefs around, how you believe an IT environment should be run and managed in this new world of cloud-based solutions and moving at the speed of light and ensuring
Absolutely. So I think with this, when we talked about cloud, we're talking about earlier about the expansion rapidly of hosts, being able to balloon the size of your cloud to meet the needs of your customers. And I think what happens often is that inside of that expansion, you can lose track of hosts, who has access to the host. You may have an old system image with old passwords or old patches out there. And so you need a tool that can monitor that holistically and then also provide you some future to see how you're using it. And that's when, in the cases where, for example, we use a lot of virtualization, I mean, again, as everyone does. So using a tool, for example, like Vistara, it allows us to not only see, of course, virtualization and manage the host, but it manages the capacity for that. So we can know that today we're using X resources, tomorrow we're going to use X plus Y, and it's able to scope and identify that for over time. And so that's an example of we are able to scale them to meet the needs of the customers within a specific aspect of how many servers. Because in our case, we built a 100% private bare metal cloud, meaning that I don't have Amazon to back me up and have infinite amount of servers. So I need to be able to ensure that I have the right amount of servers, what's available to them, and then what's the projected usage for today, and then again for tomorrow. And using a tool like Vistara helps me be able to get to that point.
And sort of digging further into that, can you highlight or give us color on some of the specific mistakes that are common in such environments, some of the pitfalls that you have explicitly put in place,
Sure.
processes and tooling around to guard against?
Absolutely. I think number one is being security, because again, what makes a cloud scary? Back in not too long ago, Steve Wozniak said, cloud, it just doesn't make sense, to kind of paraphrase what he said. And I understand. It's like the cloud is this nebulous concept, even, my family comes and says, what's a cloud? Where's the data at? I mean, it's really a bunch of computers in a specific location. And again, with that operational model applied, of course, I don't tell that to my mom, to keep it a little simple. But, the important part is being able to identify when you're scaling your cloud, where it's going to go, what services you have, and to me, security around all those services. Because again, as you add these services or you spin up new hosts to meet customer demand, it could have an old password set, an old package, and really, it's not too often that somebody won't notice those things. A great example is when I was bringing up our own BGP site. I brought up the site, so IP address was available for about 30 seconds. And again, previously it hadn't been existing on the internet for some time, and within 30 seconds, boom, we have scans immediately hitting the IPs. Because in today's world, I can scan the entire internet in about 6 hours for a single port. That's incredible. And so your services, as you spin them up, you think people won't find them, but they'll find them more rapidly than you could ever imagine. And so being able to identify that and ensure that the security of those hosts is available.
Let's talk about in this sort of cloud paradigm, DevOps sort of goes synonymously with this environment, and as you know, and I know, DevOps is sort of somewhat of a overarching term, and it's not, there are different definitions of it. Now, how do you define DevOps, particularly from the standpoint of, Netskope, and tell us some of the challenges that go along with following a DevOps style model?
That's a great question. In the past, before the term DevOps was A, popular, and B, I think even coined, I used to call this role to kind of the assembler. So it's somebody who is understanding of the gestalt, the entire, all the components brought together. So the networking, security, systems, patching, the operations of the entire environment. And secondly, I think the change from a DevOps versus an ops environment is DevOps is involved actively in the product to make it work more seamlessly in that cloud operational model. And I think that's a very important component of the DevOps side of things, because you're a part of the development team rather than just being somebody on the side who takes orders, which would be more of an operations type of role. And there's good news and and bad news about both roles. If you have, say, a tape operator, and if people still use a lot of that, that would be something that you have an operator. They put the tape in, they take it out. A DevOps is somebody who would then work with the work on the backup strategy, help understand it. So it's more of an involved role inside of the product and the service you're providing.
Sure. So DevOps. So from a IT operations management standpoint, can you give us some examples of new processes and new capabilities you would need to support following a DevOps style?
Absolutely. I think a lot of it is about the agility, right? So in the past, I worked with a gentleman from a large financial firm, and he was saying, we're looking at deploying some security infrastructure and networking for him, and he was saying, I can get a switch and a firewall set up in maybe in a week, but something like deploying a server takes 6 weeks. And the thing is, that's great for procedure to ensure things are in order. However, it's just not agile enough for the business. In things where we have algorithmic trading, where things change literally by the nanosecond, we need the IT organization to be able to be as flexible. And so there has to be a good balance between agility, but also ensuring that the infrastructure is not only secure but stable. And so I think that's a very important component to today's IT operations world, and being able to achieve that type of goal.
Sure. Definitely understand that. Another dimension of the new world in which IT operations operates in is the people in the team organization perspective. As I'm sure globally distributed teams are the norm.
Yes, absolutely.
It is never the case these days that there's IT operations or the IT team is all co-located in a single geography. And my question around this is, can you speak to some of the challenges and requirements that you see in having a globally distributed team come together in delivering IT function?
Absolutely. So I feel one of the things that we have definitely changed, as far as accessibility to services, is that you can never have a service anymore that's down. because if we have always on internet, I have 100 meg internet on my phone, with 4G and all this. It's 100 meg. It's just incredible. So we need to have an organization that follows the sun, as one would say. And so we have organizational components both here and of course in the U.S. and in overseas. And what we want to do is ensure that between shifts or between roles, and I mean shifts being when people are awake, that it's an easy transition. So having a tool that's easy to turn over to somebody, and having an alert management system that's very easy for somebody to use. And I mean easy as in the fact that they can come on board within a few minutes, they understand the state of the network or the state of the service and what's going on with it. Mm-hmm. So having a tool that provides that is very important to us. And secondly, we do a lot of late night calls, early calls, to meet the needs of the teams, and we take a balance on it. I think it's just very important to have not only teams remotely, but being able to have those teams responsive. And responsive to the requests of the organization. Sure. And so having those teams be able to transition very quickly into whatever the state of the environment is, I think is something that's very important.
Can you tell us about some of the metrics that you watch that capture all these different dimensions, the globally distributed teams, DevOps, and
absolutely.
Some of the metrics that you care about.
Yes. So within a system, a host, we have the traditional disk, CPU, things like that. That are very important to manage. But often today, hardware is just so powerful, usually the software we run into is more of an issue. Mm-hmm. So not only with the traditional monitoring of a system, CPU, disk, memory, things like that, we also heavily use stats-D to be able to identify throughout the organization about what's happening. Mm-hmm. And so that's something that's important to us. And stats-D, if you're not familiar, is something that was created at Etsy, actually through DevOps. Mm-hmm. And what it is, it's just a very simple log format to be able to look at specific counters or timers. Mm-hmm. And then being able to aggregate that data over time. And it gives you a great picture. Mm-hmm. Because often, again, the software is really more of the concern nowadays than the operating systems. Very stable, networking works very well, very low latency. So the bottleneck is really within the software. So outside of course, implementations of stats-D, we also use tools such as or products such as MongoDB, and within that, there's literally dozens, if not hundreds, of stats we need to be able to monitor. Mm-hmm. And so using a tool like Vistara, we're able to get not only the stats that we need, drill down into the stats of a very specific criteria. So example, like if there's X queries per second, we want to ensure that we don't see from 500 to 50,000 in 1 second. Mm-hmm. We want to have those bounds. Mm-hmm. So using Vistara, we are able to identify what the baselines are of our org for these specific criteria, again, things like Mongo or through stats-D, being able to set up alerts. Mm-hmm. Because the thing we don't want to have to do is have somebody literally sitting and staring at every system. Mm-hmm. Being a cloud that's very expansive and very rapid to expand to new hosts, it's not so much of just looking at a screen. Mm-hmm. So with Vistara, we have extremely detailed alert management and alert capabilities to be able to identify, again, when an alert happens, we get alerted right away, and then we have somebody that can, of course, mitigate the alert, but also being able to have dynamic runbooks. Mm-hmm. And the idea there is that, again, if a service, say, for example, our database restarts or we need to restart it, if there's additional services that need to be restarted as well, through a single runbook command, we're able to automate all of those different steps. Mm-hmm. And so, again, back to that cloud operational model, how do you make something scale and be dynamic with just, again, very few resources? Mm-hmm. It's being able to react dynamically to those situations as they occur.
Right. And just to, give our listeners a perspective on what your end users see, with the Netskope application, so they can relate to some of the challenges that you just described. Can you give us a little bit more color around how Netskope, in turn, what does your end user see, or what does Netskope provide to end users?
Absolutely. So what we provide is a cloud-based service to be able to apply policies and analytics to access of cloud services. Now, in essential, let's talk about more of a scenario where this applies. The world today, again, we've talked, as much as we have to operate it, the world never stops and people never stop working. There's mobile phones, people are working from home, BYOD, bring your own device. What do you do when people need to access a service? Now, in the past, a lot of services were hosted within an organization, so you could have that checkpoint or choke point that everything passes through. But what do you do when that exists everywhere in the world? Mm-hmm. You're using Salesforce, and they have systems literally in every region, almost in every country. So what Netskope provides is a layer between you and your cloud service to ensure that the service meets the company's needs. Mm-hmm. The security around your applications is great. Mm-hmm. And we talk a lot about allow as the new block. And what that means is that you can have a service, and what we want to do is enable people to do work, right, wherever they're at, to do it securely. So through Netskope, we can allow people to go into, say, again, Salesforce, do specific functions, and then identify it. So for example, if you have a disgruntled salesperson they're about to leave, you may find it odd that they've automatically dumped 20,000 users from the contact database in Salesforce. So Netskope would allow that to occur and then alert you on it. Alternatively, you can also block the service, but what we've really found is that when you block something, it's very obvious that it's occurring, and people may not, may think twice about their action. If you're allowing it, we're able to identify what's happening, and then react based upon that for the organization. And so when a customer uses our service, we have a specific component which we'll call the data plane, where all that traffic passes through. This literally has to be not only up, but available within the specific region to provide optimal latency between you and your application. And so we have to build data centers that are somewhere between the middleman of the customer and the cloud, and the cloud apps. And then also the primary use case for our environment is a web UI, which is the analytics. So we find more often that people want to ensure that that web UI is up and is able to access, because if it's not, then they're not able to apply those policies. So these two components are very important for Netskope to keep operating all the time.
So the bar for the availability and the responsiveness of your app is very high.
Very high.
That you're doing enforcement of policies, and so
we're literally a hop on the internet to your to the cloud.
Right, got it. That's a good way to put it. Okay, and let's going back to sort of your thoughts going forward and vision around delivering IT ops for such a high threshold environment. Can you lay out sort of what would you like ideally? What is your ideal state that you're driving towards in terms of IT ops? And
Sure. So I think number one to us is security. Number two is availability. So having an always secure, always available service is very important to us, and being able to identify the metrics around that is very important. Lastly, I think it's also about cost. So if you were an IT organization providing support for your internal company, you have a budget that you have to maintain. Now with us, we have to do what I call like the artistic trade-off of DevOps to be able to provide the best possible, most secure, always available, but at the very best available cost. And costing is a huge factor in making a business successful. And so what we do is we want to, again, sharpen that razor and provide enough services that to sustain business, to scale, but also to scale towards the future. And using something like Vistara, we've definitely been able to identify what we're using today, how we can need to scale our services when we need to add more servers, and then also doing some additional analytics on through our system. We're able to identify where do we need to have new internet pops, things like that. So again, it's always about sharpening that razor to some finite level.
Right. So speaking of analytics, as you know, analytics is sort of big data, and analytics is sort of the trend in vogue going forward here, and we're certainly interested in our working to deliver those kind of analytics. So give us some color on what kind of analytics would you like to see to plan capacity or to measure responsiveness. Just free flowing. Thoughts on what would you like to see?
So I think the being able to have that timing for each application call is very important, and again through that we use StatsD very heavily for that, and it's a perfect use case for it. But also, those traditional metrics are very important: CPU, disk, memory utilization. We talk a bit about Mongo, and Mongo is a great product, but it's a bit of a beast in being able to manage it, as opposed to traditionally deploying a database service and just assuming it's big enough. Mongo literally is built around how your application works, and so being able to dive right into those stats and ensure that again we're going to meet the needs of for our deployment is very critical. So a great feature inside of Vistara is not only the ability to have those stats, but there's sort of an application dashboard. So you have the normal host view, but it actually is the additional point of looking in exactly how that service applies. So things like Mongo, MySQL, MariaDB, all same type of category. Redis, is another big use case. Identifying and really drilling down into that, because if you look at it over enough time, what the idea is that a set of patterns will come out of that information. So, or I like to kind of relate to Linus's law: with enough eyes, all bugs are shallow.
Right. And then what about some of the future sort of capacity type analytics you like to see, trending, forecasting type?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what I mentioned as well is VMware or virtualization. We use different virtualization tools and really started off on VMware and being able to not only identify where we're at today, but where we go in the future. Because again, it's about sharpening that razor and then identifying the right amount of costing for our environment. So if we can say, today we're using X licenses, X servers, X capacity, how do we plan for the future to that? And being able to identify not only, again, like individual host capabilities, but the overall view of that from a virtualization standpoint is great. And the thing is nowadays, while VMware has definitely been and still is the strong market leader, there's a lot of other technologies such as Zen. You have other tools such as OpenStack, which you may have heard about. I want to have a heterogeneous virtualization environment and not have to take a look at just one tool. So like VMware, for example, offers a tool, Ops Manager, which gives you detailed statistics, which is great from a VMware environment. But what I do when I need to use Zen for specific use cases or OpenStack or transition between them, that's something that Vistara has been able to give me that whole view of virtualization outside of each individual hypervisor component. So really being able to manage that hypervisor environment, because the licensing can just be so expensive, the boxes can be so expensive. Really drilling down to that view holistically is very important to us.
Understood. And going back to an earlier point you had mentioned around audit, can you speak a little bit to sort of the ability to your need around tracking, who's doing what on a given server, let's say changing a configuration or via the console? Can you speak to sort of what?
Absolutely. So with, for example, with SOC compliance for things around confidentiality and privacy, again, just always in the headlines with all that's going on lately, you need to be able to provide who has access to the data, who has access to the data, who has seen the data, who has manipulated the data, and be able to very clearly provide that to auditors. Because to me, I've always, kind of been on the fence with compliance. Compliance, can be, to me, it's a tool. It's a tool to provide an organization a contract between you and your customer about what actually happens in your environment. You can always just say, well, it just works. But the thing is you have very critical data, maybe credit card information. You need to have the understanding of that life cycle of that data. So to meet that SOC compliance, the auditing is very, very important. And through Vistara, what we do is we have very, very granular policies about who can access what, when, where, all of those different things. And then again, going back, the lifetime of auditing that through our audit year, which is very important. So, and even more granular, what exactly was done with that user. Because you can talk about things like on-box encryption and data at rest encryption and all these things. All that's great, but the thing is somehow, some way, somewhere has access to manage and back up that data. And if you can't identify exactly who has access to that, you lose track of that data very quickly. And so this is, again, a huge part of what we do and a huge part of the promise and the agreement we make to our customers by having that compliance.
That just sort of made me sort of think around, what would a day in the life of your role would be, or what a day in the life Netskope IT operations team would be, right? So, you're spinning up, tens of servers, I assume, once frequently, and for each of those systems that you're spinning up, you'd like to ensure that only the right folks within your team have access.
Absolutely.
And so there's sort of this dynamic nature to access controls that you would need here. Is what I'm taking away here.
Absolutely. Because the thing is often you usually have this concept of a read-write administrator and read-only. And that's great from a policy perspective. But often we need to have extremely granular. So if I say, for example, I want to have a developer have access to their application and be able to look at certain things, I could give them direct shell access. But often what they need to do is look at a log, check a service process. So even abstracting system access to specific commands, that's another point as well. Because we want to give people the tools that do their job within the reasons of compliance and what we've agreed to with our customers. But again, ensuring that when those things are done, that they're audited and validated. And I think that's something that, at least what I've seen in my career, is a great example is like bad firewall changes, bad router changes. Who did it? Those were tools that I really liked at Juniper that their products had to be able to identify on a per command basis. And that's great if you're using say all 100% Juniper. But what happens if you're doing with Juniper, Arista, Cisco, matching with Ubuntu and Windows? I need to have that same capability across every product in every which way. And that's something that we use Vistara to do to meet our compliance regulations and again give a lot of confidence to our customers, because Netskope's tagline is cloud with confidence, and part of that confidence is how the infrastructure is managed, and it's something I take a lot of pride in to ensure that the customers are happy and ensuring that their data is secure.
Right. And then going to the other dimension, we talked about the globally distributed team aspect. As I've seen myself, my own past experience and with customers day to day, when something does go wrong and things do fail in the real world,
always do,
and you have a globally distributed team, each of which is responsible for a different aspect of the environment. Can you speak to some of the real world troubleshooting scenarios and what you would need to see what you'd like to see in an operations management tool to help you facilitate troubleshooting and problem diagnosis across a distributed team?
Absolutely. I go back to mentioning Juniper. One of the features I really liked is that they had the logging of interactive commands. So every command that's issued on a device, you can see it. So let's apply that to not only a system but your entire environment. When we have a situation that occurs, as they always do, we need to be able to have specific people respond to that distributedly. But when a situation occurs, we also review why it occurred, and so an outage report basically. And in part of that is we look at who responded to the outage and what they did from it. So an example is if they say a service stops running and they start issuing some commands. Did they issue the right commands, or could they have done it better? Because everyone wants to learn and grow, right? That's a good secondary part and very important part to a role in a career, is being able to grow and work in an environment that can help you grow. So we can go through and look at an outage or a situation and say, how did you troubleshoot? What did you meet the needs, and how did you do it? And then also optimizing that workflow. So let's say, for example, an operator comes in and a web service is down. They issue some commands on the command line. We want to identify what they've done. Is there a better way to do it? And then lastly, is there a way to automate that response? Because that way, an automated response or a canned response or a run book can ensure that every time that situation occurs, we meet the same goals. So using the auditing capabilities, we identify what people have done, how they've operated, and then how can we make that better next time? So either providing more resiliency through the service or application, but more importantly, optimizing that response. Because the thing is that when we hire folks, it's very tough sometimes, for people on the other side of the world to always be available and get that office-like experience of, working side by side with somebody. So we want to be able to provide them, a lot of guidance around what they've done and how to do it better. And so, part of we've talked about security auditing is important, but also auditing for how you act and making a response and making an action to it, I think is very important as well.
Correct. And then speaking of automated response, as I'm sure you've looked at or you've used, Vistara provides a way to hook up your alerts to provide run loops automatically in response to an alert.
Absolutely.
And post hoc go back and make sure that you have give you the audit.
Absolutely.
On that run book.
Yep, and like an example is we manage some specific tasks that normally somebody would do, say like a cron job at a specific time. Instead, we do that through a run book, because then when that task is done, again, not only is it done, but it's recorded and audited. So if we say, for example, need to delete some temp files, not only do we know which files were deleted and when, but at the time, that it was successfully executed. And I also use those run books because they generate alerts for us as kind of a canary. So I know that when the runbook executes, alerting service is up, things are running, hosts are healthy, and then I can get the status of that report. So again, these are things that are outside of the normal, monitoring, say, a CPU and responding if it's high. It's actually like having the operations environment be very responsive by using these runbooks to any sort of problem that may occur.
And the other aspect I want to sort of get your perspective on is, Netskope is a cloud-based application, and Vistara is also a cloud-based application. So you're managing the operations for a cloud-based environment using a cloud-based application, and that is the world we're going to. And I'd like to get your take on, can you contrast, what benefits are you seeing by using a cloud-based applications such as Vistara to manage application versus non-prem?
Absolutely, that's a great question. I think I've worked with many management tools and softwares over the years, and the challenge is not only having to deploy them because they're often very complicated. I mean, I remember working with like HP OpenView many years ago, and it was basically a extremely manual process. And then the challenge is that not only once you deploy it, but it's also having to manage that service. So there's the comic book Watchmen, one of the phrases from it is who watches the watchman, right? So who watches your monitoring service? So if I deploy a service on site and let's say it fails, how do I know? Do I have to have a second one? What if that one fails? Well, the nice part is by having a cloud-based service is that we have a service that's managed, maintained, secured by a third party to ensure that all those pieces are in play. And also, we're able to use that service to enhance the product. So again, there's a lot of times where we're doing something that's very specific to our environment. And if I'm, say, working with like an HP OpenView or those types of tools, to get that feature, we go back to what we talked about, that waterfall life cycle, right? 12 to 24 months to get that feature. There's been times where I needed to monitor very specific / weird things, such as like disk inodes. Call Vistara, work with them. Very quickly they rapidly turn around. And it's more to me like a partnership. Because the thing is, let's say a company, like Vistara would make every possible feature it's ever needed. So probably 99.9% of those won't be used. So they're working with me to evolve their product to meet the needs of my product and work overall. So there were, for example, some issues where we had remote access into a host and uploading files was kind of slow. Mentioned it, they reviewed it, boom, now I'm talking about 6 to 10 times faster uploading process through the system. Things like as well, when you access that cloud-based service, securely accessing it. So beyond username and password, we also use two-factor auth. So if somebody has access to, let's say, a computer and it's open, cool, maybe they have that password manager and they have the password stored, but unless they have that second factor authentication, they're not able to get into that service. So again, to kind of wrap that up, having a cloud-based service ensures that it's up. I don't have to manage or watch the watchman. I can ensure that this product can evolve rapidly, just like a cloud-based model we talked about being able to be very agile. The Vistara product is very agile for us. And we don't have to wait 6 to 9 to 12 to 24 months to have it, because literally if something occurs, we need it then.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that. As you know, one of our goals is to bring to market to our customers features on an almost weekly basis. We roll out updates and new features on a very regular cadence compared to like a traditional.
Yeah, and what I think is important is, again, we're not the only customer of Vistara, and so through the feedback of all the customers, they work together to provide the features that people need. And what I've seen is, we've been using Vistara for about a year now. What I've seen is the product just evolve really to, works very well for us, to works exactly how we need, because it's that growth and that growth partnership between the two companies. And I think that's something that's important, because if I have to run a cloud and meet the needs of being very agile, I need a service that's agile for me, and hence, the IT management through Vistara goes hand in hand with that.
And so, picking up on that point you made about Vistara serves multiple customers, and it evolves in response to the collective input of those different customers. Another area that I'm interested in your thoughts around are, Vistara collects data around the key operating metrics from across hundreds of customers, and what we'd like to see is for each of our customers to be able to apply those industry-wide or peer-wide operating metrics as a benchmark. It will obviously be in an anonymous fashion. And can you speak to how you think that would be useful to you? Let's say you wanted to know, what is the average utilization of an ESX host or a Zen host across my peer group? Can you speak to sort of how that would be useful to you?
That's exactly it. So if you look at things like how companies like Google or Amazon operate, a good example is like Google has a service now in the Bay Area where they'll deliver grocery same day to you. And so the thing is that how do you make that as effective business? Analytics, right? How did Google make the Speedy protocol? Billions and billions of samples for analytics. And so the thing is that by having a company that can identify like, hey, your system, we have, 20,000 of these available in our environment. Your system's is being outside of that scope. It allows us to learn from others' learning. Whereas normally what happens is you can do that within your own environment. So again, we talked about that VMware vSOM environment to be able to do the operations management. Imagine having that, but having it across every host, but not having to share that confidential data about how it's done, right? So being able to know and identify, how we stack up to other folks helps us live into this world of what is always called best practices, golden configs type of thing. So instead of having to learn from our own mistakes, we can learn from everybody's mistakes and everybody's successes together. And we do similar things as well at Netskope for saying optimizing latency between SaaS applications. We look at the whole about what SaaS applications are, where they're at, because again, a SaaS application is cloud-based, so it's always moving. It may be moving network regions. So we take a look at where all these systems are at and optimize our routing and our environment to do the same thing. So again, it's basically aggregating the customer data into a result that provides value for everybody. And I think that's really a key proposition to the world of analytics today.
So for those that are interested in learning more about Netskope, you can go to netskope.com, Netskope.
That's correct.
.com. And if you're interested in learning more about Vistara, you can go to vistarait.com, Vistarait.com. Here, let me just ask Rob to share any closing thoughts you'd like to share around your vision, what you'd like to see, anything you'd like to share, and then we'll call it a wrap after.
Absolutely. So I would say kind of finalize, a few years ago when Amazon first had their convention, Amazon reInvent, I went there, and I think something around like 40 to 60, maybe 50 to 60% of the people there were looking at, I want to use the cloud, but I just don't know what that means. And I think what we've seen today is more of an acceptance around the cloud and the use cases, more organizations picking it up. And I think that the one final gap that people have is, how do I ensure access into the cloud is secure and used? And so that's really why Netskope exists, is to be able to provide that type of confidence. So you can use those services and not have to worry about it. So I think what's important is being able to identify like the values your organization can get from a cloud, and if it's something that you're not confident in those applications, you can use a service like Netskope to be able to provide that confidence. And following up as well, if there's a question you have later on, you can always reach me on Twitter at RobWCam. Always happy to answer questions as I receive them as well. I've always done that, and I think it provides a lot of value to have that direct interaction with somebody.
Fantastic. Thanks, Rob. Really appreciate your time, and it was valuable just to get your perspective on this topic. So I'm going to wrap up here. Please feel free to send us questions via vistarait.com. Thank you.